Hello and welcome to the Oxford University Museum of Natural History. My name is Chris Jarvis and I'm in charge of running the adult event programme here at the museum. Events like tonight's last in the series, I'm horrified to say, last in the series of our Drawn to Nature events. Now, if that saddens you, don't worry. We do have an amazing set of events coming up in the autumn term, starting in September, and they're going to be a mixture of totally digital, hybrid, and physical events. And there's all sorts planned. We've got talks from authors and scientists. We've got in conversation pieces, debates on topical social and scientific issues, and comedy nights, late nights, which you can actually come to if you live close enough to come and do that. So do keep an eye on our website for events coming up in September. We've really enjoyed these Drawn to Nature series of events, and we hope to put on similar art and science style events. Now, if you haven't joined us before, I'd better run through the format. These aren't art lessons. These are really our attempt to share our love of the natural world and our passions with you, with some of our experts here, and to inspire a bit of creativity and let you actually find your own creative space and relax. So what we do is we start off with a talk from one of our museum experts behind the scenes, who'll tell you about their job, tell you about what passions they have, what drives them, and that will be followed by several specimen sketching challenges. And we've selected our speaker tonight has selected some beautiful specimens. So we start off with two 2-minute sketch specimens to sketch, and they're really just speed sketches, really just to get your eye in and sort of let you find your mark on the page. We then move on to a single specimen to sketch for 6 minutes. That's followed by a 10-minute specimen that you can really start to work on. And finally, we end up with a 15-minute extravaganza for you to really, really concentrate on. Now, we don't just want to inspire you artistically. Obviously, we want to inspire you intellectually and scientifically as well. So we like to make this as interactive as possible. And if you have any questions during the night for tonight's speaker, do pop them in the chat box at the bottom on the right-hand side of your screen. And then click the little circle next to it. That'll go red, and that marks it as a question. And I'll be collating all of your questions tonight, and I'll put them to tonight's speaker right at the end during that 15-minute sketching challenge. Now, we are using the webinar jam system tonight, so if any problems occur and your screen freezes or you lose connectivity at any point, there's a big red reconnect button at the top. If you click on that, that should bring you straight back into the room. And of course, if we have any problems on our end, we will endeavour to finish it, to sort them out as quickly as possible. So please do stay with us. Fingers crossed. Now, the last thing to say really is one of the great things about this series of events has been the amazing artwork that you've been sharing with us on Twitter. We really like to see your artwork, and we've had beautiful drawings from all sorts of people all around the world in all sorts of media. So if you do want to share your artwork, do post it on Twitter afterwards. Tag us in with the hashtag @morethanAdodo. That's all one word, @morethanAdodo, because they're really inspirational for us to see, and we really love seeing them. The other thing to mention is that if you feel you need longer on a sketch and you really want to work on it a lot more, we do post all of our events up on YouTube, on our YouTube channel afterwards, and you can find that on our website on the top, on the banner at the top there, and you click on the YouTube signal, and that will take you to all the Drawn to Nature events. So if you've missed a load before, and this is your first one, you want to go and see the other ones, then you can find it there. Now, tonight's speaker, it's fantastic because actually tonight's speaker does a job which really is one of the backbone jobs of the museum. And I could safely say, without her, we wouldn't have a collection for you to view. Because tonight's speaker is Jackie Chapman-Gray, and she's our conservator of life specimens. Now, that means she looks after and conserves and preserves specimens, some going back 300 and even more years. She's the one reason we can see all of these beautiful things in such good condition today. Now, Jackie works on the life collection, so she works on osteological specimens, which is bone. She works on taxidermy, things like my friend the bear there. She works on preserved fluid specimens, which sometimes people refer to as pickled specimens. each one of those has its own, and each different specimen within that range has very, very different techniques in how to conserve and look after them. She also works on preventative conservation, and not only that, she mentors the huge numbers of interns and volunteers, work placement students, and others that come through here, as well as working on exhibitions, getting specimens ready for those, and answering inquiries from the public, other museums, and researchers, and sharing her expertise with them. And Jackie's expertise really stems from an experience she had, her first experience in a museum, when she was 7. So when she was 7, Jackie visited a museum in Melbourne for the first time, and she saw a sarcophagus and a mummy, and she was immediately convinced that was what she wanted to work on, that sort of material. So she's absolutely inspiring, and she's really interested in finding out from other conservators how they do things in other museums. Of course, museums around the world have millions of different specimens made of all sorts of different materials. Every single one of those needs different techniques in order to conserve them for the future. So, without further ado, it gives me great pleasure to introduce, from her lab behind the scenes, the Conservation Laboratory, Jackie Chapman-Gray. Are you there, Jackie?
I am. Thanks, Chris.
Wonderful. Over to you.
Thank you to all of you who have joined us tonight. This evening, I'm going to talk to you about conservation and what I do as a conservator at the museum, and how this impacts on what you, the visitor, sees when you come in to visit our displays and exhibits. I'm just going to share my slideshow with you. So many people often get confused about what museum or heritage conservation is and what a conservator actually does, particularly when it comes to natural history conservation. It sometimes gets confused with natural environmental conservation, which looks at ways of preserving our natural heritage, such as landmarks, climate change, and so on. Natural history conservation is one of the many fields of materials conservation. It aims to slow down the aging or deterioration process and keep things in a state of good care and good repair so that future generations have the opportunity to visit and see them. Conservators play an important role in how we see things in museums. Without them, priceless objects from millions to thousands of years ago may fall apart, and there will be little left for people to study or enjoy, and a part of our heritage could be lost forever. In my opinion, and this is only my opinion, conservation is an art form in itself. It takes science, heritage, and a little bit of art, and then it molds them together to create a field that often turns out something that is an interesting form of scientific art. I'm one of the 2 conservators who work at the museum. I'm the conservator, as Chris said, for the life collections with a focus on zoological specimens. Our other conservator is Juliet Hay, who works on the earth collections. As Chris said, my role essentially has 2 main parts. There is a remedial conservation part, which is the preservation and conservation of the zoology specimens in the museum, whilst the second part works across the museum and focuses on preventive conservation. Remedial conservation can be anything from basic cleaning, repair, reconstructing, in-painting, and in some instances, casting materials to make a replica of an original piece. Preventive conservation looks at the environmental conditions, integrated pest management, which is known as IPM, creating microenvironments, packaging and materials. Another part of my job is to supervise and mentor conservation secondments, a variety of different types of conservation interns, volunteers, and also run training sessions for staff. Overall, my job is quite varied, and I consider myself to be extremely lucky with not only being able to work on zoological specimens, but to also have the opportunities to work with some of the art and objects and fossil materials that also form part of our museum collections. Conservation, on one hand, aims to do the impossible. We want to slow down or prevent things from deteriorating and keep all things in good repair for perpetuity. If you think about it, most things you would see in a natural history museum are designed to decay and deteriorate. And as conservators, this poses some of our biggest challenges. How do we keep something in perpetuity without drastically changing the way it looks? When I'm about to start work on something, I constantly have to ask myself a number of questions. If this is meant to deteriorate, will the work I carry out affect the significance or the integrity of the specimen or object? And will it change the way it may be viewed by the visiting public? Conservators tend to follow a code of ethics. What this means is that for me, I try to maintain the integrity and significance of a specimen whilst also trying to do the least interventive or invasive treatments on things where possible. This has to include using materials that can be reversed at any stage and also recording everything about the specimen and everything I do on it. I routinely assess our specimens and objects when working on them for damage. There are particular things that I look out for, such as insect skins, frass, which is really just insect poo, signs of wear and tear through handling, movement, and other damage such as splits, cracks, breaks, and missing parts. By documenting the condition, we can then benchmark any and all changes in the specimens. The last step to assessing any specimen before I treat it is I have to take before treatment photographs. This shows what it was like before I started work, and it's a good indication for those coming before me what has actually happened on the specimen. With natural history conservation, we also have to take into account what we put on specimens. Some insects already find the fur, feathers, and skins on our specimens really tasty. And if we introduce things like starch paste or animal glues, they're going to be even tastier to them and it'll become like a feeding frenzy. This in some ways limits the materials available to us, but it also pushes natural history conservators to think outside the box. Once I have formulated the treatment I will undertake, I look at what will be the best materials that will stabilize the specimen and work with the environmental conditions of where it will go. Sometimes this means conducting a little research on the materials, their glass transitions, flexibility, and so on. Once I finish, oops, I've gone a little bit too far. Oops. I've just lost my place as well. Once I finish my treatment, I record everything about it, the materials used, how it was applied, and take my after treatment photographs. One of the reasons we use materials that are reversible is that materials conservation is an ever-evolving field. Some techniques and materials that were used 20, 50 years ago are now obsolete. And this could happen with the materials and techniques that we use today. If you think about it, everything ages and changes over time, and conservation materials are no different. As conservators, we need to keep constantly up to date with our knowledge about new techniques, analysis, and materials, and we have to always keep training, keep reading to keep on top of it. Even with the various lockdowns, the past year has been a bit hectic and busy in the museum, with finishing off our large leatherback turtle and working on our major redisplay project, which involves getting new cases for the main court and updating our displays. I've also had a number of people seconded to the Zoology Conservation Lab to assist with a few other projects, such as getting specimens removed from the old cases, conserved and packaged up and ready to have a rest. A lighting project where we changed out our old display lighting to low wattage LED lights, and working on our display specimens to give them some further care and cleaning after the lockdown periods. As I mentioned, one of the main things I do as a conservator is I try to stop objects from getting damaged or falling apart. I have to do this by making sure the object is stable, that no bits will fall off, by making supports out of foam or board, and by making boxes to protect the objects. Once something is damaged or has fallen apart, it's my job as a conservator to try and put it back together. At times, my job is a bit like putting a puzzle back together or solving a puzzle. There's many parts to an object sometimes, and finding out where they can and should go can be a tricky and slow process. Conservation is also slow and methodical. So sometimes you look at an object and think, oh yeah, this will just take 2 hours, and 10 hours later, you're still working on that object. It's just sometimes surprises come up or things don't work quite exactly as you think they will. So not only do I record everything I see on the specimen, I also look and see if there's been any previous repairs or conservation work carried out, and it's really important that we record this. We also try and determine what they are by testing various conservation materials on them to see if we can reverse them. One of the largest and somewhat challenging specimens that I've worked on over the past year or so has been our large leatherback turtle, which is now back on display. Over 167 hours of work went into the conservation of the leatherback turtle. A total of 4 conservators worked on it over 2 years, with the majority of the work being carried out by myself in 2020. In 2018, the leatherback turtle was taken off display to undergo conservation treatment. The specimen itself is approximately 150 years old and was leaching a small amount of oil. We also think that the black that you see on the left of the screen with the white background, it's black acrylic paint, and we think the specimen was covered in this some 10 to 15 years ago to prevent further damage from the oils. To test the removal of the paint, a number of options were painstakingly tried using a variety of conservation materials mixed with solvents. Once we found the right material and low percentage solvent and mechanical methods, the process to remove the old layer of paint began. All the old paint was painstakingly removed. Between putting on poulticing, we had to leave it between 45 minutes to an hour to then remove the poultice and slowly peel and clean the paint off. Each layer of paint that we removed on different sections revealed the different conservation techniques that have been applied to repair the specimen over the years. Some of these included historic plaster fills and car body filler. Car body filler may seem like a surprising material to use for a conservator, but it was most likely used by a taxidermist. They often use car body filler on taxidermy because it's long lasting, it's got great aging properties, and it's really, really flexible. So it tells us that at some stage during its life, a taxidermist worked on the turtle. Conservators wouldn't use car body filler just because we don't know what's in the mix, and if you don't know what's in the mix, you can't reverse it. But as the car body filler wasn't causing any damage to the turtle, I thought it best to leave it on. There were also more recent plaster and Japanese tissue fills that would have caused too much damage if they had been removed. They would have lifted whole layers of plaster down the middle of the specimen, which would have been quite difficult and taken a very, very long time to slowly build up. Once I'd removed most of the paint, the next steps were gap filling, sanding, and texturing the surface to try and make it look as realistic as possible. The new fills on the leatherback turtle were done using an acrylic putty that is easily reversed and has flexibility. Japanese tissue was then used to create the turtle skin's texture by scrunching the tissue, then slowly adhering it to the surface of the specimen to try and keep the creases into it. The smaller holes were filled with very fine fibers of the tissue paper. They were pulled apart quite slowly with tweezers. And then once they were inserted into the holes, I injected that tissue fill with an acrylic adhesive. The last step was to get the leather turtle back to the right coloring and pattern. To do this, I had to do lots of research. This meant looking at many different reference images and getting some advice from people who had seen them in the wild. What I found was there was a lot of variation from turtle to turtle. As a result, all my lab cupboards and fume cupboard wall was covered in leatherback turtle images. The actual turtle, the end result was an amalgamation of all these images to try and display this variation on sort of different parts of the body. So the end result was achieved by painting the entire specimen black, then adding shading. So I added green, blue, and red shading with an airbrush to create texture and depth. And finally, airbrushing the distinctive spots on using a bespoke stencil that I made. Gloves, hands, sort of smearing some of the spots to soften the edges, and silicone brushes to create layering. So part of my job that can hold the most challenges is when I work on fluid preserved specimens, or what Chris said is also known as pickled specimens. I tend to call them wet specimens. They're generally stored in alcohol, formalin, and a few other solutions. They're difficult to repair due to the immersion in fluid and the materials that have been used in the past for repair often become restricted due to the dangerous nature and the toxicity of them. One of the favorite parts of my job is working on wet specimens. I find the complexity, challenges that they pose interesting and also fun to solve. Most of the work I have done with these specimens has included rehydration, mounting detached specimens to backing plates, stepping and topping up specimens, and the complete preparation of a small group of zebrafish from fixation, stepping up, removing air bubbles, to mounting and completing the specimens by sealing them in a jar with a high percentage alcohol. I've also taught some other conservators and interns how to work with wet collections. A secondary part to working with wet collections is working with glass. More often than not, you have to cut glass backing plates and glass lids and drill the holes in them to mount specimen. You drill a hole in the lid to top them up. You can see in the background a video featuring one member of staff, Annie Canatella, who stepped up as an assistant conservator during the most recent lockdown and one shorter one before that. She's stitching through and mounting an octopus from our teaching collection. Please don't try to do this at home. Annie is working in a well-ventilated room with a solution of alcohol and water, and she is also following our risk assessment protocol. We rehydrate specimens if they're dried out by submersing them, depending on their size and density, in a conservation detergent that has been lightly warmed for a period of hours. When we step up specimens, we test the percentage of alcohol they are in. If it's too low, we step it up in increments of 20%. Mounting a specimen sometimes requires drilling into glass and then stitching through a specimen and attaching it to the glass using monofilament thread, which is just another name for fishing line. This could also be reattaching the specimen that has come off a backing plate. In this instance, more often than not, it is finding a new area of the specimen to stitch through that is dense and can take the thread without tearing. Topping up specimen requires testing the alcohol with the density meter to check the percentage of alcohol it's in. If we don't need to step up alcohol, then we inject some of the same percentage alcohol through a small hole in the top of the lid. Then we seal that lid either with a silicone grease or a silicone rubber. If something is in formalin, we reintroduce it to a new formalin solution. For one of our exhibitions, as you can see on the slideshow, we had a number of zebrafish on ice that needed to be made into mounted wet specimens. To do this, I had to fix the specimens, remove the air bubbles, mount them to a backing plate that I had measured, cut and drill, then slowly step up the specimen into the correct percentage alcohol. Although the fish were really, really small, this took several days to complete. It was also the perfect opportunity to use this as a teaching opportunity for my intern and some other staff. When we say we have to fix a wet specimen, what that means is we don't repair them, but we want to stop all the internal organs from decaying and getting smelly. So what we do is we inject a formalin solution in through the brain cavity and into the stomach cavity. Although they're small, just as an added extra precaution, we did put them in a formalin solution overnight just to make sure they were absolutely fixed. When I came in the next day, as you can see in the beaker, in the images, some of the fish were floating. This meant that they had air bubbles. What's really great about these fish is that they're quite small, and fish have swim bladders that keep them afloat. So the easiest thing with these fish were to squeeze their stomach gently just to release the air through the anus. That meant they would then sink to the bottom and they would be perfect and ready for mounting. Once I did this, I slowly stepped up the fish through a variety of alcohol percentages over an 8-hour period. The last step was to mount the fish on glass backing plates to make them look a little bit more like 3D. So there were two plates, one behind the other. And also to make them look like they were a school of fish swimming. So the last thing to do was to put them in the jar with the final high percentage of alcohol, then seal the lid with a silicone rubber and inject a small amount of fluid through the topping up hole in the lid, just to get it about a mil or so be under the lid, then sealing that topping up hole. The other secret pleasure I have at the museum is that I get to work on the art and objects that are in our collections. I've removed hinges from paper drawings. I've removed drawings and prints from frames. The most exciting thing I've worked on to date was a large composite 12 to 13 foot sledge. In 2018, I had the opportunity to conserve and reconstruct one of the sledges, and the video that you can see is me cleaning the runners and the bed slats for the sledge. The sledge, we think, was Lawrence Rickard Wager's sledge, and he was a collector for the museum. He collected geological samples from Greenland between 1932 and 1936. As it had been a little while since I'd worked on wood, and before I started to contemplate what treatments I should use, I needed to do some research, but I also needed to talk to some other conservators about treatment options. Wager's sledge posed a few challenges. It was quite large. It was also a complex composite object. This means it was made up of different types of materials and was used to pull heavy samples through snow and sludge. After condition assessing and taking my treatment photographs, I proceeded to clean the pieces of the sledge using a variety of cleaning methods: vacuum brushing, mechanical cleaning for the metal components, solvent cleaning, and smoke sponge cleaning. There were a few cracks in some of the bed slats that needed repair, and this was done with a flexible adhesive, and the metal screws were buffered with a low percentage polyvinyl butyl coating. Reconstruction took about half a day, and I needed a hand, so Juliet Hay, our earth conservator, helped me with it. We had a few images of other sledges to go from this time period, and we cycled between them to try and get everything in the right order. All of the reconstructed pieces were held in place with cotton tape to prevent any damage from occurring. Overall, we had a lot of fun. It was extremely satisfying to see it put back together and to see that the repairs held as well, and also to have an accurate image of what the sledge looked like when it was in use. There are many diverse techniques and materials that conservators can use to stabilize specimens. Conservation as a field has developed its own techniques and materials, but it also pools and employs tools and materials and methods from a variety of archaeological, manufacturing, and art processes, as well as numerous other processes. The list of things and treatments that we can use are very diverse and range from least interventive to extremely invasive. It's a matter, as a conservator, it's a matter of knowing the composition and properties of the materials you are working on, and the composition of what you can potentially add, and the pros and cons of those materials and how they can be easily reversed at any stage throughout time. As a result, conservation is an ever-evolving field that aims to use the best inert, reversible materials possible. Also, conservation in our museum is a collective effort by everybody who works here. People keep an eye out for pests, they keep an eye out for damage, splits, anything like a room feeling slightly stickier than it should be or hotter. So everybody's invested in keeping the collections in a good state of repair. I've worked on many different specimens and objects over the years, and I've done a variety of treatments. But throughout all this time, my main interest as a conservator lie with conservation and preservation of fluid preserved specimens and crossover techniques from other specialisms such as paper conservation, ethnographic conservation, archaeological conservation that can be used particularly with wet specimens, but also across the board with natural history conservation. All in all, I absolutely love my job. I love what I do. It's easy to come to work every day. The diversity that it throws up each day is incredible. I'm passionate about preserving our cultural and material history for future generations to see, and educating people about how important conservation is, and how our histories can impact our present and future. I can honestly say that I'm one of the luckiest people who gets to work closely with rare, wonderful, and beautiful things that most people can only imagine and get little chance to see up close. Every day at work for me is kind of like Christmas. It's the excitement of not knowing what each specimen is going to throw at you. And each day is a little bit like opening presents. You never know what's going to come up or across your table. It's been wonderful sharing my passion for my job and conservation with you. Thank you to Laura and Chris. And most of all, thank you to all of you for listening to me. And I hope you've been inspired to come to the museum to see our displays and to see what conservation work you can spot. Thank you.
That's absolutely wonderful, Jackie. Thank you very much. I can see why you work. You love your work so much, and how passionate you are about it. We've got some great questions coming in, which I'm going to ask you at the end. But now it's time for you to get creative back at home. Time to get your art stuff ready, because we're going to set off with our first 2-minute speed sketching challenge. And this is a rather fantastic goat skull. You have 2 minutes. So, Jackie, had some fantastic questions come through. Some amazing questions. You really inspired people, and I think the first thing I have to say is actually had something marked as a question, which I think I will share with you, which is your colleague, our other colleague, Juliet, who's our other conservator, who works on the Earth side of the collections on our fossils and rocks. He said it was a splendid talk and commented on how knowledgeable you are and talented, and how proud she is to know you as a colleague and a counterpart. So I thought I'd just share that with you. One of the questions we've got a lot though is Rose asked this question, what's your favorite conservation technique to use?
That's quite a difficult one. I do like humidification, so humidifying skins to manipulate them and shape them back into place. So the armadillo you see was worked on by Tom Greenway, and he used humidification on the ear that you can see to get it back into its right shape and orientation. He also supported it. I also like using heat to reshape carapaces and scutes on turtle and tortoise shells. So you heat them up lightly and then manipulate them back into shape, and that's a lot of fun. But there's so many different techniques out there. I find it hard to choose.
No, I can imagine. And another question that's come up, Eileen and Agnes both asked this, is what's your favourite specimen that you've ever worked on? Do you have a favourite?
Oh, there's too many. As an Australian, of course, I love Australian animals. I don't really know. As much as the turtle at times was difficult, I did like working on the leatherback, and when it went out of the lab, I had a huge sense of loss and had to quickly put things on the table to cover up that loss that I was feeling.
I mean, that's a long amount of time to invest in a specimen.
Yeah, wet specimens, any wet specimen, really. The more difficult the issue or challenges, the better. The more weird, the better.
That sort of leads me to Danielle's question. She asked, "Don't you ever get squeamish working with the wet specimens?"
Never. It's my favorite thing. I don't think it would bother me if I was sitting down eating, looking at wet specimens or anything like that. Yeah, no, not at all. There's something about every single one that fascinates me, whether it's the way it's attached, the way it looks, the way it's stained, the liquid it's in, whether it's leaching oils or fats, the containers it's in, how it's being sealed. So everything about them is quite interesting and different from jar to jar.
Now, thinking about the leatherback turtle and the amount of time you invested in it, Danielle wanted to know what's the longest amount of time you've ever spent on one specimen?
It's the leatherback turtle.
It is the leatherback.
So it was 167 hours. There were two people who helped with the painting. So Rob Douglas and Catherine Child did a little bit of painting on the turtle. It's hard to break it down. So I think I probably did over 100 hours on it. And that's the longest time. Before that, the longest I'd ever worked on something was about 26 hours. And that was on iron axe head. Wow. And that was just cleaning and putting it back together. And that felt like a long time, but the turtle was definitely much, much longer than that.
Now, that's a big specimen. And Abigail actually leads me to Abigail's question. She wants to know what's the biggest and the smallest specimens you've ever worked on?
Largest would have to be, well, the largest, it's not such a specimen as such. The largest thing I've ever worked on was a walrus sea aircraft. In Australia, I helped restore the wing of a walrus aircraft, which was airworthy and seaworthy. So that was a lot of fun. Within natural history, definitely the turtle's the biggest thing. The smallest thing, I think, would have been something from Earth. So maybe a trilobite or a small fossil.
Okay, well, it's interesting. I mean, you've worked on so many things, and you've got such a delicate touch to work on things like that rabbit gut and those tiny little zebrafish. Francesca wanted to know, has ever one of your conservation projects ever gone wrong?
Conservation projects go wrong all the time. They don't necessarily, I wouldn't call them wrong. I mean, failure, you learn from failure anyway. So every time something doesn't work, it's a huge learning curve. Most conservators have little notebooks that we write treatments and things that work and things that didn't. I've got one I've been carrying around for the last 20 odd years that has treatments. So not necessarily wrong. So an example behind me on the table, there's a kingfisher, and there was a very, very small fraction of claw that had come off that I repaired. It took 2 hours to repair. I had to keep taking the repair down to put back on to get the orientation, the join right. So sometimes things just don't work how you think. You have to be a little bit more creative with what you're doing, and sometimes just give up on one treatment and completely change it altogether. So I guess in one sense, you could say that it was wrong. It's just changing the way you look and think about something.
Yeah. Now, talking about your notebook, must include all sorts of little secrets and tips and hints and techniques you've used. Mark wanted to know, are there any household objects that you use in ingenious ways in object conservation?
Yes. We use a sieve when we use an ultrasonic bath. So you put something in the sieve to stop it hitting on the bottom of the bath and causing damage. The sieve just acts as a buffer. I use skewers to make my own cotton swabs. I also use skewers for cleaning sometimes metal components on specimens and various things. So cleaning off copper corrosion, skewers are the nicest thing because copper and copper alloys are quite soft. I've got a packet. I'm grinning slightly here. I've got a packet of magic erasers, which are the sponges that you can buy that you can clean things off walls, and that's really good for cleaning frescoes and rendered walls and historic stone. It's amazing. I guess I've used dishwashing sponges for what would be conservation detergents and cleaning. I think Juliet and I may have used the sponge part of the scouring sponges to clean some mammoth tusks with a conservation detergent, and it worked really well. It worked better than our conservation sponges. So there's little bits and pieces that sneak in. I've got a pair of nail clippers for making boxes to stop the box edge being sharp, or if I'm using a support board, to put a curve on the support board so it doesn't poke through plastic. Lots of little things.
Great tips. It really brings me on to it. I mean, Eloise wanted to know, I mean, you're obviously, using all sorts of things around you, almost recycling things. But Eloise said, is there much of an environmental impact on conserving specimens, particularly from the materials used?
Not really. So as conservators, we recycle all of our materials where we can. So a lot of the foam is called plastizote, jiffy foam, ether foam. We try and keep all the offcuts. We recycle what we can for other specimens. The offcuts often get used in art creations sometimes here for school activities. Our acrylic adhesives, we can dry them out in their jars and then they go in recycling. Solvents we evaporate off. So our cotton swabs, the tips of them go in what we call a swab jar. We don't touch them. We punch a hole in and you pull the skewer out. Our paper that we use for solvent cleaning or solvent solutions, we dry that out in the fume hood, and that can go out as either general waste or a form of recycling waste.
So all part of the museum's sort of sustainability audit and challenge that we will try and stick to, which is great to know. Now, somebody else actually, I must find out again. is there a point at which I think this was Ritchie said, is there a point at which a specimen has had so much work done to it in order to preserve it that it's lost its natural integrity, where it will be abandoned, replaced by a model made from synthetic materials from scratch? So is there a point where it just becomes a synthetic model, I suppose?
Not really. I think there's points where you stop working. So conservation, if you look at it, can be subjective. Each conservator will view something differently. There is a huge debate, and has been a huge raging debate for years amongst conservation or the conservation fields about when to stop. So we tend to stop before it gets to that point. The main thing that we try and do is stabilize things. Sometimes that could mean just putting a piece of plastozote under one leg or something like that. When things are what I would say beyond repair, it's normally because there's some external damage, like insect damage. Say there's an animal with fur that we can't clean anymore or something like that because the insects have made that fur fall out, or light has caused damage. So we would choose a different alternative for conserving that specimen. So it might just have go into the freezer as a preventative for stopping insects from eating it. It would get a light sort of fluff back into place, but we don't do too much to them. I haven't come across anything at this stage in my career that has been beyond repair, or that's had so much repair it's gone into being a model made for it. There's a possibility that that will happen in the future. I don't honestly know, but so far, not yet.
Excellent. I think we've got time for one more question, and this one I think is one which is fascinating because it's it is such a specialist field. But Laura asked, how does one get into the field of conservation? What was your journey into your role?
Mine was a very squiggly journey. So I started in museums when I was 18 as a volunteer, and then an exhibition assistant, and I slowly moved through different fields. So I was a collections or cataloger, collections assistant. I went back to uni and got a postgraduate in museum studies. I did transcribing oral histories for a while. I worked in research for a while, writing text for a new permanent exhibition at a museum. And then I sort of moved from that into being a curator. So I cared for displays. I designed, developed, wrote, and put on exhibitions, temporary exhibitions. From there, I kind of, everything in that role started turning into conservation. So I sort of was doing disaster response, IPM. When things needed a clean, it came to me. When things got damaged, it came to me. So I always knew I wanted to go into conservation. I just didn't quite know what it was when I was younger. So from there, I sort of went back to uni. I got a job as a preservation technician at a state library, working first in paper and photography. So doing basic conservation techniques, and then working, I had a year off that, and then went back into it as a conservation assistant, working on a mixed collection. So working on cleaning textiles, a variety of objects. And sort of that made me realize how much I loved doing that work. So I came to the UK to study and did an MA and MSc in conservation. So it was kind of, I think I was unusual on my course because I came from a collections background.
It's probably a big benefit in the long run. I mean, you've gone through that sort of gamut of museum and collection sort of work beforehand, and so you've seen a lot. It's great.
It makes you more pragmatic. You have a more pragmatic approach and understand the difficulties that each different area comes up against when they're trying to do something. And it's also a bit easier to negotiate between departments what needs to be done and get that nice medium between the two. To become a conservator, you can all conservators need to have some form of chemistry, whether it's high school or university level. There's also a course that you can do called Chemistry for Conservators. It's a I guess it's an online course that you can do.
Mm-hmm.
There's undergraduate degrees in Cardiff, London, Lincoln, Durham, I think. West Dean might have some. And then there's a number of master's degrees at UCL, Lincoln, Cardiff again, and I want to say Durham, but I can't remember all of them. So there's lots of different ways. I would recommend volunteering in a conservation lab just to see if you actually like it. And that's a good way to get your foot in the door also into the courses.
Exactly, and I think follow your passions and your interests in life is always a good tip. And I'm afraid I think we've pretty much run out of time there. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us again for this last Drawn to Nature. Thank you so much, Jackie, for putting together such an informative and fantastic talk. It just leaves me with one more thing to say, which is, if you do enjoy these Drawn to Nature things, and you want to share your artwork, don't forget to post them on Twitter. Tag us in so we can see, just how you've captured that fruit bat's face. So put us in Twitter, tag us in at More Than a Dodo, and we look forward to seeing you all in the autumn for a new program of events. I'd like to thank also Laura Ashby, who's been behind the scenes on all of these Drawn to Nature events, who's worked so hard at actually lighting and filming all of these things. And thank you so much to all of my colleagues who have so generously given up their time to share their passions with us. Good night, everybody. We hope to see you in the autumn.